Skylab was in orbit. America's first space station had survived the violence of launch, separated from its rocket, and settled into the blackness above Earth. By any normal measure, the mission had succeeded. Yet almost immediately, NASA found itself facing a question that should not have existed. How do you rescue a space station that has already been launched? The first images and telemetry arriving from orbit carried a contradiction. Skylab was where it was supposed to be, but something important was missing. A section of the station's outer protection had torn away during ascent. The missing structure was called a micrometeoroid shield. It had been designed to protect the station from tiny impacts in space. It also protected Skylab from the sun. Now the station was orbiting Earth without one of the layers that kept its interior under control. Launch success had created a survival problem. At first, the damage seemed isolated to the outside of the vehicle. Then, other consequences appeared. One of Skylab's main solar arrays had been ripped away completely. Another remained attached, but jammed in place by debris. The station was alive, but wounded. Power was reduced. Protection was gone. And inside, temperatures began climbing. The workshop at the heart of Skylab had been designed for astronauts who would soon arrive and live there for weeks. Instead, it sat empty, heating up with every orbit. The danger was not dramatic in the way people often imagine space disasters. Nothing was exploding. Nothing was tumbling out of control. The threat was quieter than that. Heat. Heat moving into equipment. Heat moving into supplies. Heat moving into a station nobody could yet enter. From the ground, engineers watched temperatures rise and tried to understand what the station was becoming. A successful launch was supposed to hand the mission over to its first crew. Instead, the launch had created a countdown. Not a countdown to liftoff. A countdown to lost options. Every day, Skylab remained exposed. Recovery became harder. Every day, the station remained too hot. The future mission became less certain. The original plan began to disappear. The first crew was supposed to arrive, settle in, and begin using America's first space station. Now NASA had a different problem. Could the station even be used at all? The launch of the first crew was delayed. Not because Skylab had failed to reach orbit, because nobody wanted to send astronauts into a station that might no longer be habitable. The mission on paper remained the same. The mission, in reality, had changed completely. Across NASA facilities, engineers began searching for ways to give Skylab its missing shade. Repair concepts appeared rapidly. Some were large. Some were complicated. Some demanded operations that carried their own risks. But the station kept circling Earth while the discussions continued. Recovery margin kept shrinking. Among the proposed solutions was something surprisingly simple. A deployable sunshade. A parasol. The word sounds almost ordinary. It suggests something opened beside a swimming pool on a summer afternoon. But this parasol was becoming one of the most important pieces of hardware in the entire program. The idea was attractive because it avoided a problem that had become increasingly obvious. The damaged area was difficult to reach. A repair performed entirely outside the station would be challenging. The parasol offered another path. It could be carried into orbit, inserted through a small opening, deployed from inside. If it worked, that condition hung over everything. Because while engineers could test the design on Earth, nobody could fully recreate what would happen beside a damaged station in orbit. The rescue hardware was prepared. The crew trained. And gradually, the nature of the mission shifted. Pete Conrad, Joseph Kerwin, Paul Weitz. They were still launching to Skylab. But they were no longer launching primarily to operate it. They were launching to save it. The station remained overhead, visible only as a moving point of light to observers below. Yet it had become the subject at risk. The spacecraft itself was now waiting for rescue. When Skylab 2 finally launched, it carried astronauts and uncertainty in roughly equal measure. Approaching the station brought the problem into view. For days, the crisis had existed mostly through reports, telemetry, engineering diagrams, and assumptions. Now there was something else. Direct observation. The crew performed a fly-around inspection. From nearby, the damage was impossible to ignore. Sections that should have been protected were exposed. The missing shield was no longer an engineering description. It was a physical absence. A piece of the station's skin had been torn away. There is something revealing about seeing damage up close. Distance allows optimism. Close inspection removes it. The rescue problem was real, visible, unavoidable. Any lingering hope that conditions had been exaggerated began to fade. The station they had come to occupy was the same station they now had to save. And the clock had not stopped while they traveled there. Inside Skylab, the crew encountered the consequences of the exposure. The station could still function, but it was not the station anyone had intended to receive. The mission had reached its midpoint. The objective was no longer understanding the damage. The objective was changing the station's future. Everything narrowed toward a single operation. The parasol, folded tightly for launch, it waited inside the spacecraft like an answer that had not yet proven itself. The device needed to emerge through a small opening and expand correctly outside the station. That description sounds straightforward. Reality rarely is. A parasol that failed to deploy would remain only an idea. And by this point, too much depended on it. Alternative paths had been disappearing for days. Power remained compromised. Exposure continued. The station still needed shade. The crew began the deployment. Slowly, the folded material emerged from the station. Gold-colored fabric appeared against black space. At first, it looked almost fragile. Not like something carrying the hopes of a major space program. Not like something standing between a space station and continuing thermal damage. Yet the operation continued. More material emerged. The structure unfolded, expanded, found its shape. One of the most memorable images of the entire Skylab story began to take form. A damaged station, a small artificial sunshade, and a mission whose future suddenly depended on whether the second object could protect the first. The parasol opened, not instantly, not dramatically, just gradually enough for observers to watch possibility returning to the mission. Then came the waiting, because deployment was not the goal. The goal was temperature. The station itself had to answer the question. If the parasol worked, Skylab would reveal it through changing conditions. If it failed, the station would reveal that too. The numbers began to move. Temperatures started falling. Not all at once, but enough. Then more. The trend continued. The workshop that had been absorbing heat began moving back toward the conditions required for human habitation. The station was responding. The parasol was doing what it had been designed to do. A damaged spacecraft was becoming usable again. The rescue had succeeded. Not every challenge disappeared. The damaged solar array situation still existed. Operational difficulties remained. Spaceflight did not suddenly become simple. But the central threat had changed. The station was no longer drifting toward a future where its mission might never truly begin. For the first time since launch, Skylab could start becoming what it had been intended to be. A space station. That transformation is easy to overlook because it happened after orbit had already been achieved. History often treats launch as the moment of victory. Skylab tells a different story. The rocket had done its job. The station had reached space. And none of that was enough. The real victory arrived later. It arrived through a damaged exterior, a shrinking window of opportunity, and a folded parasol carried into orbit as an unproven solution. In the end, one of NASA's most important space achievements survived not because everything worked as planned, but because adaptation happened before recovery margin disappeared. The image that remains is not the launch. It is a damaged station hanging above Earth while a gold-colored parasol slowly unfolds beside it. A space station becoming a space station at last.